The fellas were hassling about a party for my 18th. Firstly, I don't think they understood what a party at Gran's would be like. Light beers, probably a sit-down dinner, and her patrolling the house with a torch in case anyone was up to no good. No thanks. Secondly, I wanted to see Daniel. I hadn't seen him since the weekend after the St John's game. He was good then, and according to Brendan, he was a bit better now. Brendan's comment about how we only ever talked about Daniel when we ran didn't stop us. Both of us still felt the need to keep him close, and that was how we did it. It was like watching him grow up, going through his life year by year. Some days it felt as though he could almost be there, running alongside us, being cheeky and playful. Maybe one day he would be. Brendan had designed a couple of running tracks for our Mount Everest training. We had to concentrate on building up our stamina, and there wasn't a single hill in Cog Hill Brendan hadn't found. The runs were hard and you hurt like hell, but it was worth it. I looked good too. Not like one of those emaciated runners you see on the TV. That was because I couldn't stop eating. Even Gran's dinners were starting to taste okay. The other night I had 3 helpings of her soggy meatloaf. You should have seen her smile. My chest and arms had become so firm you could crack a nut on them. Chrissy loved telling me how sexy they were, and I loved hearing it. In my books, that was enough reason to suffer. My legs and breathing were strong. Running up the ascent was almost a piece of cake. At least I didn't feel like spewing when I got to the top. The run to the waterhole was my favourite. September was warm, and one morning Brendan and I stripped down to our boxes and jumped into the river. The water was cold and fresh. Somehow it felt full of promises. I could feel summer coming, and I pictured Chrissy and me lying on the river rocks, soaking up the sun like lizards. I reckon it'll be a hot summer, Brendan said, floating on his back, staring up at another cloudless sky. A real scorcher. The cicadas are singing already. Yeah, well, now I know your secret. I won't have to go to the toxic Cog Hill pool. They're pretty heavy-handed on the chlorine there, Brendan said. So my eyeballs discovered. I floated on my back, thinking of the time I saw Chrissy at the Cog Hill pool, how I watched the drops of water slide down her back, and how she turned around and whispered, "How's your granddad?" pushing me into my fears and darkness. Back then it didn't take much. Now I only thought of the drops sliding down her skin. Are you coming with me to see Daniel this weekend? Brendan asked me, even though it's your birthday. It's my birthday on the Sunday, and anyway, big deal, it's just another birthday. What did you do last year again? It was the week after Daniel's hearing in the local court, the same week Kyles and I went back to school. I swam towards the riverbank and pulled myself out of the water. Wasn't really a birthday to remember, that one. You know, Tom, I never thought I'd say it, but Daniel's come a long way since then. Yeah. It was a bloody godsend we got him into the crisis centre. I can't even think about what could have happened if we hadn't. So he's really into this mentoring stuff? I asked. You'll hear all about it, Brendan warned me. Daniel's mentor, the older bloke, Jerry, helps him mentor Theo, the other boy in there on a drink driving charge who isn't doing so well. Yeah, I've met him. Poor bastard. He's quite a few steps behind Daniel. Do you reckon Finn really will go and see Daniel? He's talking about it. So is Auntie Kath. Brendan was tying up his trainers. But honestly, I think they're still wrapping their heads around how to transfer Finn from a wheelchair to a bed. Brendan stood up. It's going to be a long slog there, Tom. He says he doesn't hate Daniel. Brendan shook his head. God knows why. Daniel, his dark moods, his jealous rages, his long periods of brooding, and his complete lack of accountability. He took so much from so many. We started the run back home, the hard part. It wasn't steep like the ascent. Instead, it was a sequence of small to middle-sized hills. The distance was further. That's what made it a little killer. It looks like we'll have a few days in Kathmandu before we fly to Lukla. The day I could run and chat like Brendan would be the day I knew I was really fit. The trek starts from there. It's a gradual climb, which means we acclimatise on the way. No falling off mountain stories, please, I panted. I've been avoiding them. The trek we're doing is graded tough, not Superman, he said. No ice picks required. Don't worry, I've done my research. Kalar Patar, which is where we go, is about 5,500 metres high. Awesome, eh? Imagine the sunrises. I worked it out, I puffed. It's almost 12 and a half weeks till we're there. And counting, Brendan said. What about Chrissy? You'll miss her, won't you? Yeah, but she'll be here when I get back. She will. They'll all be waiting for you. The day before my 18th birthday, 376 days since the accident, Mum, Brendan and I drove to Wesley. I could almost do the checkpoints with my eyes shut. Name, approved visitor, belongings on the table, locker key, stand with your arms by your side, arms on top of your head, blah, blah, blah. Daniel's hair was growing and his face had filled out a bit, but it didn't stop the punch in the guts I still felt every time I saw him in the regulation green tracksuit. Maybe it was my way of fighting acceptance, because I could never think of Daniel as a prisoner. Regardless of what Daniel did and what an up-himself, selfish dickhead he could be, he was my brother. He was the one who taught me how to kick and pass, how to raise my eyebrow, how to ride a bike, how to piss high up against a wall, how to skip stones, how to drive Kylie crazy. Every memory I had, Daniel was etched into it. Daniel didn't die that night, and he didn't become a cripple. So many times, even now, the what-ifs played with my head. What if Daniel had died? What if Daniel had ended up a vegetable, never able to move again? It made me sick to the guts. But another question always surfaced after that one, another one I battled with almost more. Was it so bad to be happy that my brother lived, knowing what he did that night was so unforgivable? Was it? As always, Daniel's eyes lit up when he saw us. "Hey bro, Brendan, how you doing?" "Hey mate," we said, sitting down. "Where's the old girl? They said she was here too." "She's got an appointment with the social worker," answered Brendan. "Yeah, good old Mrs. Kumar." He smiled. "What would Gran call her? A saint who just had her gods mixed up?" We shrugged. "Hey, happy birthday, Tommy." "Yeah, thanks. You doing anything?" "Bit of a quiet dinner, I think." "With that sexy girlfriend I keep hearing about?" "Piss off," I groaned. "What have you been telling him, Brendan?" "Nah, it was Kylie." Daniel shook his head and chuckled. "She gave us the goss." "See?" Brendan threw up his arms. The guard turned suddenly. "No hassles," Daniel said to him. The guard nodded but kept his eyes our way. "So what's been happening here?" I asked. Daniel scratched his chin, a cheeky smile sneaking onto his face. "Oh, let's see. We had a bit of a time last night with a string of hookers the screws shouted us. And oh yeah, the night before we got stuck into the booze and yeah, all right," I said. Brendan was pissing himself. "I'll tell you what did happen," Daniel said to us. "Owen visited the other day. Special allowance. I nearly died when I heard he was here. Every letter, he kept saying he was going to come." Daniel paused. "But, you know, you don't really expect them to." "Did it go okay?" asked Brendan. "Yeah. I was glad I didn't know before, because I would have shat my pants. Jerry, my mentor, he says often they're the best visits, the ones you're not expecting. Less time to get uptight." "I didn't see Owen at the St. John's game," I told Daniel. "I know he's helping coach. I suppose it was a long way to go for a game against Benny's." "He was there," nodded Daniel, "and he saw you." "Really?" My brain had registered the bare minimum that day. He couldn't believe how much Benny's had improved. He thought it was probably because they had you and Dad. I said, "What do you reckon, you mullet? Tom would make any team look good." "Isn't that right, Brendan?" "Yes, mate. Tommy had a blinder." "So Owen told me." "See, Tom never tells me none of that stuff. You just said the game was okay, so I've got to imagine it, because I'm not there with you." For a couple of seconds, Daniel looked at me. "What?" I said. "I'm proud of you. Is that okay, you turkey?" Mum was escorted in. "Darling," she said, squeezing Daniel's hand. "Doesn't he look well, boys?" she said to us. "Yeah." We nodded like little kids. "Mrs. Kumar says you're going great." Mum pulled the seat up close to Daniel. The guards ignored it. They were used to her. Even though she looked atrocious to us, she was still pretty compared to most of the females around here. "She says you're doing an excellent job with Theo." "It's going pretty well, Mum." Daniel sounded serious but pleased with himself. "I think finally Jerry and I are starting to get through to him." "That's wonderful." Daniel smiled, his blue-grey eyes like Mum's lighting up his face. Sitting there, watching him chat away, it was hard to believe these were the eyes that had flashed such uncontrollable rage and hatred that night. That these eyes belonged to the person who did such a terrible thing. For my birthday dinner, Gran cooked roast pork. This time she got it right, with crackling that wasn't pure charcoal. Mum made a special apple sauce that we hadn't had for at least a year. Dad bought some champagne. Kylie decorated the table with flowers and candles. Chrissy made a chocolate mud cake, and Johnny brought these dickhead party hats with streamers coming out the top. Chrissy kept blushing, saying we didn't have to wear them if we didn't want to. But after a while it was funny, especially seeing as Gran wore hers back to front the whole night without knowing. The heavy drapes on the windows were pulled back to let in the evening breeze. Gran's gallery of saints watched over us, but tonight I reckon they were smiling. They may have even been thinking, what a nice family. The prezzies were good too. Kylie gave me a cool beanie. Brendan and Johnny gave me an awesome pair of gloves for Nepal. Mum and Dad put a check for $200 in a card that read, "To our darling middle child." I hated the way Mum called me that. It made me feel like some fringe dweller. "You are very special and we are so proud of you. We hope your trek in Nepal is wonderful. You have already proved to us you can climb mountains. Love, Mum and Dad." Chrissy bawled her eyes out when she read it. In private, she gave me a travel diary. Each day I'd be away, she'd written me a message. All kinds of things like, "Have you brushed your teeth? Are you wearing clean undies? Are you wearing undies? 15 days till I see you." And, "I love you, Tom Brennan." "Happy birthday," everyone cheered, their glasses in the air. I felt my eyes scrunch and my cheeks stretch. I was grinning so hard. After everyone had gone home or to bed, Gran called me into her room. "I've got something for you," she said. I didn't forget. Birthday socks. That's what it always was. She was sitting on the bed shuffling through a box. "Here it is." She pulled a small card out from under some papers. When she held it up, I saw it was one of her holy cards. I must have pulled a face of horror. "Oh, this isn't for you," she said, scribbling Father Vincent on an envelope. "I'm not that foolish." She slipped the card inside. "Okay, that's done." "Who was it?" "A saint," she answered. "Duh, Gran." "Which one?" I said, sitting on the bed next to her. "St. Clare the Franciscan," she said in her serious voice reserved only for the saints. "Father Vincent is going to try to find me a large picture of her when he's in Sydney." "Right. I nodded, hiding the smirk. Do you want to hang her up somewhere? Above my bed. She pointed. As you can see, I've taken St. Bernardine of Siena down. How come? Well, she never gave me any help, Gran muttered. Pointless having her up there all these years. I didn't take that any further. I remembered who St. Bernardine was meant to protect. Gamblers, like my pa. So what's the story with St. Clair? I don't know her. St. Clair saved her home and town, Gran said, shuffling around in the box again. When people tried to destroy everything she had, she stood firm with her faith. Okay. I think I understood what she was getting at. Well, happy birthday, Tom. Gran's hand trembled as she passed me an envelope. She looked right at me, and for that split second I saw in her eyes the years of grief and uncertainty she had suffered. It was like suddenly understanding something about who she was. It was Gran who'd had no choice. She couldn't leave Pa, so her faith had become her armour as she weathered years in a marriage that had cared little for her. Take it, she whispered. I opened the envelope. Inside was an airline ticket. Sydney, Kathmandu, Lukla, Kathmandu, Sydney. Gran! Have a wonderful trip, Thomas. Chrissy was studying for her finals, and I was trying my hardest not to get in the way. I hung out with the fellas, playing pool, eating pizza, watching videos, going to the movies, whatever was on offer. All they ever wanted to know was where Chrissy was. They were still having kittens over us being together. The last week in October was stinking, with high 20s every day. There was nothing else to do but hang out with red eyeballs at the Cog Hill pool. Rory's master plan was to get a holiday job there so we could dilute the chlorine by half. Brad reckoned it wasn't such a good idea, as maybe it wouldn't kill the piss germs. That was a dead giveaway. Now when Brad swam near us, we'd start yelling, "Germ man," or "piss germs." Jimmy changed Brad's famous belly flop from the flop to the bladder buster. There were worse ways to kill time. I felt a bit lousy, not telling the fellas about the waterhole, but Brendan had sworn me to secrecy. He was right, though. It was special, and if everyone knew about it, then it wouldn't be. That wasn't the main reason behind my tight lips. After Chrissy's final exam, I planned to take her there for a surprise. It was that perfect place I'd been searching for. As it turned out, she thought so too. One arvo, when I got home from school, there was an envelope on my bed. Straight away, I recognised Chrissy's writing. There was no stamp or address. It just said, Tom. I ripped it open, searching the house for Gran or Mum to find out who'd delivered it. Then I began to read the letter inside and had a snappy change of mind. Tom, she'd written, meet me at the waterhole. Yes, I know about the waterhole. Tomorrow, Saturday, morning at 7. Love, C. P.S. Make sure Brendan's not planning a morning run there. He wasn't. I knew that for sure. He was driving to Arelin with Kylie and Gran. When I went to the kitchen the next morning wearing my shorts and trainers, Brendan went berserk. Way to go, boy. He slapped me on the back. I told you the running gets in your blood. Hey, didn't I? Crawler, Kylie mouthed at me. Yeah, well, I thought I'd go for a bit of a jog. That wasn't telling an actual lie. Which track? The waterhole, I think. Good man, Brendan said to me. He's looking the goods, isn't he, Mum? Gran looked up from the kettle. It's my cooking. Yeah, Gran. Again, Kylie mouthed. Crawler. You'll feel like a dip by the time you get to the river, Brendan said. They reckon it's going to be 31 degrees today. Tess and Joe will be sweating it up at Wesley. I hope they pack plenty of water. Have they left? I asked. Gran's muffled voice emerged from the fridge. You'll have to get up earlier if you want to know the goings-on here. It wasn't even 6:30. By the way, Tom, now she was packing oranges into an esky. Can you check the chooks later on? I think Bernadette is laying. No worries, Gran. By the time Gran got through her epic chook-laying instructions, the clock said 6:50. It was a good 20-minute run to the waterhole, and that was at a fast pace. I waved them off, closed the gates behind them, stretched until their car was out of sight, then bolted. I'd seen Chrissy once all week, and it had been hard to think of anything else. I hurtled down the hills and through the bushes, the overgrown branches scratching my arms. My legs charged out in front of me like they had a mind of their own. Faster, 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 they ran in time with my head. Ducking and weaving through the trees was like trying to find the gap to break through and score. I could almost feel the ball in my hands and hear Daniel running up alongside me, calling for it. Soon the air cooled and the light speckled. Now I could hear the rush of the river. I burst through the tangled vines, my heart pumping in my throat. In 1 second, I'd be kissing her all over, making up for the days I hadn't been able to. Chrissy, I shouted. Chrissy! I walked along the riverbank, shaking the leaves and cobwebs off me. Chrissy! Chrissy! But she was nowhere. The sweat poured off me. My t-shirt stuck to me like a second skin. I peeled it off, tucking it into the back of my shorts. Chrissy! Christina Tulake, where are you? A noise of something falling into the river disturbed the cockatoos above me. A mass of white flew off, squawking into the sky. I looked around. There was no one there. Chrissy! I called again. Plop! A stone hit the water. Plop! Another one. Then I heard the giggling. Busted! I shouted, my voice bouncing over to the other side. Where are you? From behind a clump of orange water lilies, Chrissy Toulouse swam into view, her strong brown shoulders skimming the surface of the water. I'm gonna get you, I laughed, tearing off my shorts, chucking my trainers in the bush. Chrissy shook her head. No boxers allowed, she said. Her naked body floated along the water, shafts of sunlight flickering across her skin. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I ripped my boxers off and dived in. Chrissy swam towards me, her giggles bubbling in the water. Hello, she smiled. I took her in my arms, her skin smooth and slippery against mine. I kissed her neck over and over. I love you. Chrissy's fingers clawed at my hair. I really love you. I love you. Do you? Yes, I said, more than you'll ever understand. I gripped her hands. We treaded the water, gasping in this moment. You are everything. Everything. Really? You helped me find my old self. Believe me, that's everything. Chrissy wrapped her limbs around me. For a second she held me tight, then whispered, This is the place. I looked at her. She smiled and nodded. Are you... I began. Shh. She touched my lips. It's perfect. In silence we swam to the rocks. I took her hand as we climbed out of the water, our bodies trembling. We lay beside each other, our faces close, our breath warm and fast with hunger. And there on the riverbank, she took me inside her, our bodies rocking gently as we melted into one. That was the morning we swam and loved each other, and that was the morning Tom Brennan came back. Forever.